Tired of being the laughingstock of his classmates, a nerdy boy decides to become the most popular student in school, but his plans are destroyed when he becomes the victim of a curse. Today we're going to recap the story of the movie, Diary of a Wimpy Kid, from 2010. It's the first day of school after the summer break and Greg Heffley is woken up in a hurry by his older brother, who says he's late. While getting dressed, the boy runs to the kitchen and devours his cereal. He then prepares to brush his teeth when he is surprised by his father. Frank heard a suspicious noise in the middle of the night and went downstairs to investigate what was going on. Seeing his father, Greg decides to look at the window and realizes that it's still dark outside. The man then reminds him that school doesn't start until next week and now, thanks to the noise Greg made, the whole family is awake. When asked by his mother what the fuss was about, the boy blames Roderick and claims that he was the one who woke him up at 4 a.m. However, when Frank and Susan arrive at the teenager's room, he pretends to be asleep so as not to be scolded and Greg is outed as a liar. A few days later, his alarm clock goes off in the morning and he decides to look out of the window before getting up. It's the first day of school and Roderick decides to give his younger brother some advice. After saying a huge list of things Greg shouldn't do, Roderick asks him not to let anyone see him with his best friend, Rowley, because he's too clumsy. After having breakfast with his family, the boy goes to school and realizes that elementary school is not for the faint-hearted. The school is full of delinquents and freaks. What's more, Greg is smaller than 95% of the boys in 6th grade. However, when he sees Chirag Gupta, Greg feels relieved, as the boy is even smaller than him, making him the perfect target for bullies. When he arrives in the classroom, Greg carefully considers which desk to choose, as he doesn't want to be stuck next to a person for the rest of the year. While he's assessing every corner of the room, Rowley appears and Greg has no choice but to sit down next to him. In physical education class, the teacher divides the boys into two groups and puts all the weaker students on the same team. During the game, Greg and Rowley realize that they have no chance of winning and decide to hide so as not to be forced to continue playing. At that moment, they met Angie, a 7th grader, who was reading a book under the bleachers. However, when he realizes that the girl is an outcast, Greg decides to stay away from her, as he doesn't want to further destroy his popularity at school. After putting on his shirt, Greg spots a slice of moldy cheese lying in the courtyard and decides to approach it. Before the boy had a chance to touch him, Chirag approached and managed to stop his classmate from making a big mistake. The little boy says that one day the cheese mysteriously appeared at school and no one touched it, not even to throw it away. Over time, that slice of cheese became more and more disgusting until a boy called Darren Walsh decided to touch it. After that, all the children at school disliked him and Darren became an outcast. The only way to get rid of this curse was to pass it on to someone else. Then, one day, he plucked up the courage to do what was necessary and thus began the cheese touch paranoia, which spread throughout the school. This madness lasted several months until a German student called Dieter Müller was affected by the cheese touch. As he couldn't speak English fluently, he didn't understand why the students avoided him and, when his family returned to Dusseldorf, Dieter took the curse with him. Since then, the slice of cheese has remained there, waiting patiently for its next victim. During lunch, Greg and Rowley try to find a place to sit in the cafeteria, but no one wants them around. So the only solution is to sit on the floor, where all the weirdos from school gather to eat. At the end of the class, Greg returns home furious because his main goal is to become one of the most popular boys in school. He is arriving home with Rowley when he sees Roderick getting out of his van, which he uses to transport his band members and instruments. The teenager then asks his brother how his first day at school went and Greg tries to pretend that everything went well, but Rowley tells him the whole truth. When he discovers that his younger brother has eaten lunch on the cafeteria floor, Roderick takes the opportunity to terrorize him even more and claims that Greg will never appear in the school yearbook. Furious, Greg decides to break into the young man's room and finds the yearbook from when he was in 6th grade. However, before the boy has had a chance to flip through all the pages, Roderick appears and Rowley decides to hold him back so that Greg has a chance to escape. When his friend is safe in his room, Rowley leaves. A few minutes later, Greg has to leave the room to go to the bathroom and, when he gets there, he is surprised by Roderick, who has been waiting all this time for a chance to take revenge. However, before the fight could start, Susan showed up and Roderick managed to turn the whole situation around so that Greg would be grounded. When he arrives at school the next day, the boy has the idea of signing up for some activity to increase his popularity and Angie invites him to take part in the school newspaper. However, Greg refuses the invitation, as he plans to become the subject of the newspaper and not write it. Instead, the young man decides to sign up to take part in the wrestling tournament and convinces Rowley to join him. After a quick lesson from the teacher, the students have to face each other in the arena and Greg shamefully loses every duel he has with Fregley, a boy even smaller than him. So Greg adopts a new strategy and decides to gain 30 pounds to move up a category and fight Rowley. However, no matter how much the boy eats, he will never be able to gain all that weight in such a short space of time. When he realizes this, he decides to cheat and hides anklets in his socks before weighing himself. In this way, Greg manages to fool his teacher and move up a category. However, instead of fighting Rowley, he has to face Patty and ends up being defeated by her. At that moment, Angie shows up to record the victory and publishes the photo in the newspaper, causing Greg to be seen as a wimp by the whole school. Despite this, the boy managed to achieve one of his goals and became the cover story of the newspaper. Since he hasn't been able to gain popularity with his physical performance, the young man decides to become the best dressed in school and goes to class wearing a suit and tie. When Greg arrives in his classroom, he finds Rowley wearing the same clothes as him and they both become the targets of teasing from all their classmates. At this point, Greg starts to think that maybe Roderick was right about Rowley, but he doesn't want to abandon him. After all, the boy is his best friend. So instead of turning away from him, Greg decides to try to change him and teaches Rowley some ways to fit in better with other boys his age. It's Halloween, also known as the best night of the year, so Greg asks his friend not to wear any strange costumes. However, hours later, when they meet, Greg notices that Rowley is wearing an extremely flashy outfit and the boy tells him that his mother made him wear it so he wouldn't risk getting lost in the crowd. While the two friends work out a strategy to collect more sweets, Roderick shows up and discovers that they are planning to go to the rich people's neighborhood. To get there, the pair will have to cross a scary forest and Roderick never misses an opportunity to frighten them. The young man says that there was a house in the middle of the woods and it had to be torn down after a terrible incident. According to Roderick, two boys who were in elementary school went there to ask for candy on Halloween, but the house was full of demons. The creatures then put the boys inside a giant oven and, after roasting them, they devoured them. After hearing this story, the two friends are frightened, but they don't let themselves be intimidated and go to the north side to get the best sweets. However, after a long night collecting chocolates, the pair are chased by a group of bullies in a pickup truck and run through the neighborhood until they reach Greg's grandmother's house. The elderly woman went out to play bingo with her friends, but the key was hidden under the mat and the two boys managed to get in. When they are safely inside the house, the bullies decide to wait outside, so Greg and Rowley decide to go to the garage to arm themselves and face their enemies. At that moment, Greg accidentally scratches Pete's truck and makes his enemies even angrier. During their escape, the pair decide to hide in the demon woods, as they know that this is their only chance of escape, as the bullies don't have the courage to go in there. As they run through the woods, Greg and Rowley hear some demonic laughter and run away scared, but the truth is that the sound was being emitted by Fregley. Minutes later, the pair arrive home and both feel relieved to have survived. At the end of the day, they feel it was worth the risk, as they managed to collect a large amount of sweets. The following week, during class, the students hear an announcement from the principal saying that new vacancies have opened up for the school's security patrol and Greg immediately thinks about applying. The security patrol is like the school police, so he believes he will be respected by everyone. After talking to the director, Greg and Rowley are selected for the job and discover that they will receive their first assignment shortly after lunch. While helping a group of children cross the street, the two friends come across the guys who chased them on Halloween and hide among the children so as not to be noticed. In the following months, they had no more problems with the other students. After all, they were now an authority in the school. When winter arrives, Rowley tells his friend about the incredible presents he got for Christmas and reveals that his family will be taking a trip to New York in the new year. Furious at not getting any video games from his parents, Greg decides to take his frustrations out on Rowley and knocks him over a snowy mountain. During the fall, the boy ends up breaking his arm and gains the attention of the girls in his class, as they feel sorry for him when they see his arm in a cast. When he sees his friend gaining popularity, Greg becomes jealous and convinces himself that Rowley only got a place in the cafeteria thanks to him, because Greg was responsible for causing the accident. Realizing that all the attention his friend has received has been thanks to an injury, Greg decides to show up at school with his hand bandaged, but is completely ignored by the girls. That day, he finds out that there are vacancies in the drawing competition for the school newspaper and decides to ask Rowley to help him create something cool. However, during the work, the two friends end up disagreeing and decide to continue with their drawings separately. A few days later, the principal announces the results of the competition and Greg learns that the class council has chosen Rowley's drawing to appear in the school newspaper. After that, Rowley became one of the most popular pupils in the school and went on to take the job that Greg had wanted so much. On a rainy day, While walking down the street with the group of children, Greg spots a truck approaching and is afraid of being seen by Pete. In an attempt to hide from the bully, the boy asks the children to climb into a hole, with the excuse that they will be devoured by aliens. However, when the vehicle approaches, Greg realizes that it isn't Pete's car, but now it's too late, because he ends up being seen by Mrs. Irvine. As the boy is wearing his friend's raincoat, Irvine thinks it is Rowley who is terrorizing the children and decides to report him to the principal. Instead of taking the blame, Greg lets Rowley be framed unfairly and gets him kicked off the school patrol. When he discovers the truth, the boy is disappointed and decides to distance himself from Greg, realizing that he is a terrible friend. Now that he has cut ties with Rowley, Greg feels alone and soon realizes that there is nothing he can do to rekindle the friendship. In the following weeks, the truth about the false suspicions that fell on Rowley comes to light and Greg is expelled from the patrol. In return, Rowley not only gets his job back, but is promoted to team captain. In the end, Greg realizes that everything he has done to increase his popularity has only served to sink him even further. Seeing Rowley making new friends, Greg gets even angrier and can't think of anything but a plan to get rid of Colin. In an attempt to make Rowley jealous, the boy decides to make friends with Fregley. However, after spending a few minutes at the boy's house, Greg remembers that he is very strange and decides to leave. However, the boy won't let him go home and Greg locks himself in the bathroom. During the night, he receives a note under the door and discovers that Fregley may be even more disgusting than he imagined. After a traumatic afternoon, Greg finally manages to collect his things and go home. When he meets his father, the boy runs to hug him and Frank soon realizes that something is wrong with him, but Greg refuses to say what happened. After everything that has happened over the last few days, the young man decides to make one last attempt to get into the school yearbook and signs up for a talent show. The teacher then decides to do a test to select the students who will take part in the musical and is impressed by Greg's beautiful voice. As he had the best performance, the boy was selected to play Dorothy, the protagonist of The Wizard of Oz. However, he would rather be a tree than play a girl and Patty ends up playing the lead role. After several weeks of training, the day of the big show finally arrives and Greg's parents are in the audience, along with hundreds of people, eager to see the boy's performance. When he sees the boy dressed as an apple tree, Roderick can't hold back his laughter and, when he realizes he's being recorded by his brother, Greg gets stuck. The boy can't sing his part of the song and Patty is furious with him. Suddenly, the young woman starts screaming and accuses Greg of ruining her play. At this point, the whole cast starts fighting with each other and throwing fruit at each other. When the curtains close, everyone leaves and Greg goes to meet his parents. At this point, he realizes that his mother is disappointed and feels bad that he hasn't lived up to her expectations. The boy is tired of school and of failing every time he tries to do something right. What's more, his popularity is worse than ever. So he decides to stay out of the limelight for a while, but he has forgotten that Roderick is always around to make life difficult for him. One afternoon, when the whole family is gathered in the living room, the teenager shows up with a piece of paper he found in the trash can in Greg's room and hands it to his mother. It's actually an invitation to the school's mother-son dance, which Greg hadn't planned on attending. Determined to get revenge for all the times his older brother has gotten him into trouble, the boy decides to set a trap for Roderick. While his brother is rehearsing with his band, Greg puts a chocolate in his backpack along with an adult magazine. Minutes later, Susan appears in the living room and finds Manny with the magazine in his hands. When she discovers that the object belongs to Roderick, the woman immediately goes to talk to him and the young man is scolded in front of his friends. As well as being embarrassed, he finds out that he'll be grounded for a month for having that kind of search and won't be able to drive his van. Seeing his brother being punished, Greg celebrates and is happy to finally get his revenge. Immediately, he calls Rowley to tell him what has happened, but when his friend answers the phone, Greg is silent as he remembers that they are no longer on speaking terms. At the weekend, during the dance, Susan realizes that her son is sad that he no longer has Rowley's friendship and advises him to go and make up with him. Although he doesn't know exactly what to say, Greg decides to try his luck and approaches him to talk to him, but Colin appears soon after. Embarrassed, Greg leaves and sits down next to his mother, who is saddened to discover that the two friends haven't managed to work things out. During the party, the DJ plays Rowley's favorite song and the boy calls his mother to the dance floor. That night, the pair become the stars of the party and Rowley gains even more popularity. On Monday, during recess, the boy comes up to talk to Greg and asks for his video game back. When they were still friends, Rowley left one of his favorite games at the boy's house, but now he needs it to play with Colin. However, Greg refuses to give it back and Rowley gets angry. Seeing the two boys arguing, Patty encourages them to start a fight and the students who were in the playground gather around them. As they both roll on the floor, The delinquents who chased them on Halloween show up and Pete orders the students to get out of there. The pair are then captured. Seeing the moldy cheese on the floor, Pete forces Rowley to pick it up and orders the boy to eat a piece. When Greg's turn comes, a school official shows up and the delinquents have to flee. Minutes later, the students return and, seeing only half the slice on the floor, Patty concludes that Rowley has eaten the moldy cheese. At this point, Greg decides to clean up after his friend and claims that it was he who ate that cheese. Seeing the boy with the slice in his hand, all the students run away and Greg becomes known for having the cheese touch, continuing the curse. Even though everyone ran away, Angie praises Greg for his selfless attitude. As usual, she was reading under the bleachers and saw everything that happened, so she knows that Greg took it upon himself to protect Rowley. After seeing his friend sacrifice himself so that he wouldn't be humiliated, Rowley decides to rekindle his friendship with Greg and the two become inseparable again. At the end of the school year, Patty hands out the yearbook to all the students in the school and Greg finds out that his picture has appeared in the book, even if it wasn't exactly what he expected. So what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below. And if you liked the video, like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you next time.